My son didn't ask me to come to his career-changing dinner because he loved me. He asked because he thought I could be used. That truth didn't arrive gently. It landed in my body like a bruise you don't see at first, only feel later when you try to move. We were standing in my kitchen, evening light cutting across the floor, the smell of food still hanging in the air. He kept adjusting his cuffs like something about this conversation was already uncomfortable for him. His voice was careful, too careful. "Ma, I need you to come with me," he said. Not want, not hope, need. He explained it was his end-of-year officers' dinner. Big people would be there. Executives, the owner. He said this night could change his career. I listened, nodding, waiting for the part where he said he wanted to share something important with his mother. That part never came. "I don't want to show up alone," he added. "Everybody brings someone, spouses, fiancés. It looks better." Better. That word sat between us like something sharp. He said it casually, as if he were talking about a jacket or a watch, something you wear to look respectable. Then he said the part that made my stomach go cold. "I want you to be my +1. Not because he missed me, not because he was proud, because I fit the picture. I watched my son talk and realized he had already decided what role I would play in his life that night. He didn't see me as his mother in that moment. He saw me as a symbol, something that could make him look stable, rooted, safe, something he could hold up in front of powerful people and say, "See? I come from something respectable. My name is Iris Freeman. I raised that boy alone. I worked when I was tired. I stayed quiet when I was hurt. And in that kitchen, I understood something that hurt deeper than anything he could have said out loud. I was being invited, not as family, but as strategy. I didn't confront him. I didn't embarrass him in his own house. I asked questions the way women learn to do when they want to understand what's really being asked of them. What kind of dinner is it? Formal. What do you want me to wear? Something simple. Nothing loud, nothing that draws attention. And what do you want me to say? Just smile. Let me do the talking. I'll handle everything. Each instruction stacked on the last, building something that didn't feel like guidance. It felt like containment. Then he said, "I'll buy you something nice. Not you already look beautiful. Not come as you are. Buy. You. Something. Nice." Like I needed to be upgraded to be acceptable. If you're listening to this right now, tell me where you're watching from, because I know I'm not the only woman who has ever stood in her own home and realized her child was quietly trying to redesign her. He talked about the man who owned the company, a billionaire, old school, respected, the kind of person whose approval could open doors that stayed closed for everyone else. He said this man noticed everything. He said this man valued family, and I finally understood the real purpose of the invitation. I wasn't being brought because I mattered. I was being brought because I looked like something that would matter to him. I told him I would go. The relief on my son's face came too quickly. Not joy, not gratitude. Relief, like he'd just secured the last piece of a plan. The day of the dinner, I dressed with care, not to become invisible, but to remain myself. Pearls, soft makeup, my back straight, my face composed. If I was walking into a room where I was already being measured, I would not shrink before the measurement even began. He picked me up just before sunset. The car smelled like clean leather and ambition. He drove fast, eyes on the road, jaw tight. We barely spoke. The closer we got to the hotel, the more silent he became, like he was saving his voice. For people who mattered more than I did. When the valet stand came into view and the building lights washed across the windshield, my son finally leaned toward me. His voice dropped. Not angry, not loud, controlled. "Just stay in the back tonight." Bryce said it like he was trying to save me from something, but the way his mouth tightened afterward told the truth. He was trying to save himself. The valet stand was already ahead of us, men in dark coats moving with quick hands, the hotel entrance glowing like it had money in the walls, and my son's eyes stayed forward as if looking at me would make him feel what he'd just said. For a second, I didn't answer. I let the silence sit between us, heavy enough to force him to hear himself. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse, and I felt that old, quiet pain mothers get when they realize they've become something their child wants to manage instead of cherish. The back, I repeated softly, not as a question, because I refused to make it easy for him by acting confused. Bryce's knuckles stayed white on the steering wheel. "Ma, I'm not trying to be disrespectful," he said quickly, like he'd practiced that line too. I need you to understand the room we're walking into." His tone had that polished impatience in it, the kind he uses when he's explaining something he thinks I shouldn't need explained. This isn't a family reunion. It's officers, directors, people who make decisions. The car rolled forward, and the valet leaned toward his window with a small smile that looked trained. Bryce handed him the keys without looking, and even that gesture had a rhythm to it. Like he belonged here, like this world had finally started accepting him. When we stepped out, the cold air hit my cheeks, and I watched Bryce straighten his jacket, shoulders squaring as if he was putting on a different skin. I matched his pace toward the entrance, not rushing, not lagging, just steady, because I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me shrink. Inside, the lobby smelled like citrus and money. Voices bounced off high ceilings, laughter came in clean bursts, and everywhere I looked, there were people who seemed to know exactly where their hands belonged. On a spouse's back, around a glass, tucked casually into pockets that cost more than my first car. Bryce leaned toward me again, close enough that his words wouldn't carry. "Listen," he said, softer now, "the way you speak when you don't want to sound cruel but still want to control. Marcus Halden is going to be here, the owner." He paused like the title alone should do something to me. "He's a billionaire, Ma, not the internet kind, the kind that sits on boards and has people's futures in his mouth." His eyes flicked toward the ballroom doors where a staff member checked names and nodded people through. "He's old school. Reputation matters to him. Presentation matters. Family matters." The way Bryce said family made my stomach turn, because he didn't mean love, he meant optics, the appearance of being rooted, respectable, chosen by the right kind of life. "So you think if you bring your mother," I said, keeping my voice even, "he'll think better of you?" Bryce exhaled through his nose like I was making it sound uglier than it needed to be. "I think it shows I'm grounded," he said. "I think it shows I'm not out here reckless. I think it shows I respect where I come from." The words were smooth, but his eyes wouldn't hold mine. That's how I knew the truth was sitting under his tongue, unsaid. He didn't respect where he came from. He feared it. "And me staying in the back," I said, my voice lower now, "that's part of showing respect?" Bryce's jaw flexed. "Ma, please." He looked around as a couple passed us, black, elegant, older than him, the man's hand resting gently at the small of the woman's back. Bryce watched them for half a second, then turned back to me, and I caught something raw there. Envy, hunger, the ache of wanting to belong so badly you start rearranging the people who love you. "You don't understand how quick people judge," he said. "One wrong impression and you're done. And I'm not trying to fight uphill forever." The sentence landed like a confession. He wasn't fighting the world. He was fighting the part of himself that came from me. And in that moment, it hit me with a clarity that made my chest go cold. Bryce didn't bring me because he was proud. He brought me because he thought I could be useful, but only if I stayed small enough not to remind anyone what he was trying to outgrow. The insult wasn't just the words, it was the plan behind them. And the ugliest part was how familiar it felt. How many times over the years Bryce had asked me to adjust, to soften, to lower my voice, to let him handle it. Like, my presence was a problem he could solve with instructions. This wasn't new. Tonight was just the first time he said it out loud in a place where I couldn't pretend it was nothing. Bryce offered his arm as we approached the ballroom doors, not as comfort, but as choreography. I took it anyway, not because I agreed with his shame, but because I wanted to see the room that required a son to hide his mother. I wanted to hear what people say when they think you're just furniture. I wanted to watch my son in the world he worshipped and learn exactly what he was willing to trade to keep his place in it. I lifted my chin, felt the weight of my own silence settle into something sharper than sadness, and made a decision that surprised even me. I would go in, but I would not disappear. I would observe. The ballroom doors opened like they were letting us into a world that had been practicing its posture for hours. Light hit. First, warm, expensive light that softened everything. Touched. Then sound, low laughter, clinking glass, a band easing through something jazzy and careful, the kind of music that never interrupts a conversation, just flatters it. The room smelled like perfume and polished wood and food that didn't announce itself. Everything in there looked intentional, from the white linens to the way people stood in small circles like they'd been arranged by someone who understood power. Bryce's arm tightened slightly at my elbow as soon as we stepped in, not in protection, more like direction. His eyes moved quickly, scanning faces, reading the room the way a man reads a contract. "Stay close," he murmured, then corrected himself as if the words tasted wrong. "Not too close." We walked past a table where name cards sat like tiny declarations, past clusters of men in suits and women in dresses that caught the light when they turned. Everyone looked relaxed, but it was a rehearsed relaxation, the kind people wear when they know they're being watched. I could feel it, the hierarchy in the air. Who greeted who first? Who waited to be greeted? Who touched a shoulder and who didn't? Who laughed too loud because they wanted to be noticed? Who didn't have to? Bryce leaned toward a man near the entrance, shook his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Good to see you, sir," like he'd practiced that exact tone in the mirror. The man glanced at me and gave a polite nod. "And this is," he started. Bryce's smile sharpened. "She's with me," he said, smooth and quick, as if that answered everything. The man's eyes flicked over me. My earrings, my posture, my face. Then he nodded again, the way people nod at a coat rack. "Enjoy the evening," he said, already turning away. I felt Bryce's satisfaction like a quiet exhale. He hadn't lied, but he hadn't told the truth either. That small cruelty was the kind that could be served with dessert. Bryce guided me toward the far side of the room, away from the main cluster where the loudest conversations rose and fell around a table draped in black cloth. At that table, people stood like they belonged there, laughing with their bodies angled open, confident. I noticed the way Bryce's gaze kept returning to it, like a hungry man watching food behind glass. "Your seat is over here," he said, pointing to a smaller table closer to the wall, near a service door where staff slipped in and out with trays balanced like they'd been trained to carry other people's celebrations. I looked at the table, nice enough, but positioned in a way that made it clear who it was for. Overflow, extras, the ones who didn't quite fit the picture. Bryce pulled out a chair for me, polite on the surface, then leaned down and spoke softly, the words aimed at my ear like a private instruction. "Just sit. I'll be moving around. If anyone asks, just be pleasant. Pleasant. Like a requirement. Like a role." I sat slowly and watched him straighten up and walk away, already nodding, already smiling, already becoming the version of himself he thought the room would approve. My hands rested in my lap, and I forced my face to stay calm, even as something inside me hardened. A woman at the next table leaned toward me after a moment. She was dressed beautifully, hair swept back, her eyes warm but curious. "I'm sorry," she said, voice gentle. "Are you Bryce's wife?" I looked at her and gave her the truth, because I didn't know how to be anything else. "I'm his mother." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, surprise, not disrespect. Then she smiled. "Oh, he didn't mention—" She stopped herself, polite enough to let the sentence die before it became an accusation. "Well, it's lovely to meet you." We exchanged names, small talk, the safe kind. As we spoke, I watched Bryce across the room. He was shaking hands, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, leaning in toward people like he was trying to absorb their status through proximity. Then another man, younger, came up to my table with a drink in his hand, friendly, curious. "Ma'am," he said, "I've seen Bryce around. Are you family?" Before I could answer, Bryce appeared at his shoulder as if he'd been summoned by the word family. His smile was wide. Too wide. "She's with me," he said again, cutting me off before I could say mother. The young man blinked, confused. "Oh," he said, then tried to recover. "Well, it's nice to meet you." Bryce's hand touched the man's elbow lightly, steering him away as if the conversation had gone too close to something dangerous. When Bryce turned back to me, his smile thinned, and in his eyes I saw it. Panic that I might take up too much space. "You okay?" he asked, but it wasn't concern. It was a check. "I'm fine," I said, my voice even. Bryce nodded like that was all he needed, then moved away again before my presence could become a story. I sat there and let the truth settle, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't the seat by the wall that hurt the most. It was the way Bryce kept trimming me down with his words, sanding away the parts of me that proved he came from somewhere human. He didn't want them to know he had a mother who wore her life plainly. He wanted them to think he had risen without roots, because roots meant soil, and soil meant somebody had to have been low before he could climb. A server passed with a tray of champagne. I declined, not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted my mind clear. I watched. I listened. I learned. People spoke in half sentences and quiet bragging. Promotions, numbers. Marcus will be pleased. Marcus doesn't like surprises. His name floated through the room like a rule, and each time it did, Bryce's posture changed, his shoulders pulling back, his jaw tightening, like he could feel judgment approaching even before it arrived. Then, without warning, the music softened, conversations thinned, heads turned, not all at once, but in waves, as if the room had received a signal only certain people could hear. Bryce stopped mid-laugh. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the staff near the doors straightened. The air shifted, thicker, sharper, charged with attention. The room fell quiet, and I knew before I even looked that the billionaire had arrived. The quiet didn't happen all at once. It moved through the room like a hand sliding down a harp string, soft at first, then firm, until even the laughter knew to lower itself. I watched people straighten in their seats, watched shoulders square and smiles tighten into something more careful. Bryce appeared near the center of the room like he'd been summoned by the change in air. His eyes tracked toward the entrance, his face already wearing that eager discipline he'd been practicing all night. I stayed still. I didn't rush to see. I let the moment come to me because I wanted to feel what everybody else was feeling. This hush that wasn't reverence exactly, but authority. Then the doors opened wider, and a small group stepped in, executives in dark suits like shadows flanking the main figure. He didn't need to announce himself. The room announced him. He moved with a quiet certainty that made space without asking for it, and people shifted out of his way as if they'd rehearsed the shape of his presence. I lifted my eyes to him and recognized him instantly, not because he looked the same. Time had done what time does, sharpened his jaw, silvered the hair at his temples, carved small lines at the corners of his eyes. But there are certain things time can't disguise. The way he carried his shoulders, like he'd been taught young to stand tall even when he had nothing. The way his gaze didn't dart, it settled, deliberate, measuring. And his mouth, set in that same thoughtful line I used to watch when he was turning an idea over in his mind. Marcus Halden. I felt his name hit me in two places at once, in the room, where it floated like a rule, and in my chest, where it landed like a memory with teeth. I had seen his name in business magazines over the years, watched interviews where he talked about discipline, restraint, and building something that lasts. I knew the world knew him now. I just never imagined this was the same man who once shared cold fries with me in a student center. For a fraction of a second, the ballroom, with its soft lights and polished laughter, disappeared. I was back in a cramped college hallway with vending machines humming, the smell of cheap coffee in the air, Marcus leaning close over a notebook, pencil tapping his teeth while he listened to me talk. I saw his hands again, ink-stained fingers calloused from working jobs he never bragged about. I heard his laugh, low and surprised, the kind a man gives when he didn't expect to be understood so deeply. My throat tightened, and I pressed my tongue gently against the back of my teeth to keep myself from making any sound at all. 30 years. Nearly 3 decades since I'd last seen him. No calls, no letters, no holiday cards, nothing that could soften this collision. When I walked away, I didn't just leave a man. I left a whole version of my life, and I did it on purpose. Bryce had said Marcus notices things. He was right about that. Even now, as Marcus stepped forward with those executives, his eyes didn't look hungry. They looked awake. He was listening with his gaze. People approached him in careful waves, hands out, smiles practiced, introductions whispered like offerings. Marcus accepted them with the smallest nods, polite but distant, as if his mind wasn't fully in the room. Bryce moved with the crowd, his shoulders high, grin fixed, eager to be seen in Marcus's field of vision. I watched him angle himself into position like a man trying to catch sunlight. I watched him smooth his jacket again and again, as if fabric could erase the fact that he didn't know what to do with his own mother. Someone near my table leaned toward another guest and murmured, "That's him." The words carried the kind of awe that always makes me uncomfortable. Men are men, I wanted to say. They put their shoes on one foot at a time. But my body betrayed me, because it wasn't awe in me. It was something older and sharper, an ache I didn't realize still had a pulse. I kept my face calm. I did not sit up straighter. I did not let my hands tremble. I did not reach for my purse like I needed armor. I did the one thing I knew how to do when the world tried to make me small. I held still and watched, because if I reacted even a little, Bryce would notice. And if Bryce noticed, he would do what he always does when he feels out of control. He would try to manage me. Not now, not here, not in this room that had already assigned me a seat by the wall. Marcus moved deeper into the ballroom, the executives guiding him toward the central table, the place of honor. Voices floated, "Sir, Marcus, welcome." But they sounded like they belonged to someone else's life. My heartbeat stayed steady, but my thoughts ran fast. Did he ever try to find me for real? Or did he only search in ways that didn't require him to defy the people who once told him I wasn't good enough? The question rose in me like smoke, but I swallowed it down. Tonight wasn't for answers. Tonight was for survival. Because whatever Marcus did next, Bryce had built his whole strategy on one belief, that Marcus would respect him for parading his mother like proof of good character. And Marcus was walking in with a past Bryce didn't even know existed. I kept my gaze on the table in front of me, pretended to adjust my napkin, let my eyes flick up only when I could do it without anyone noticing. Marcus paused briefly near the center of the room, as if something invisible had tugged at him. His smile faded, not into anger, but into a kind of stunned stillness I recognized from long ago. It was the look of a man who had just seen something he thought life had taken away forever. Slowly, his head turned. His eyes swept the room once, then again, sharper this time. and then they stopped, locked, right on me. Marcus's eyes didn't just land on me, they held the way a hand holds a fragile glass, careful like moving too fast might shatter something. He stood there for a breath that felt too long for a man with a room waiting on him, and in that pause I watched him change. The polite mask he'd been wearing for the executives thinned. His shoulders, so controlled a moment ago, shifted as if his body had forgotten the rules for a second. Someone beside him leaned in and murmured something I couldn't hear, probably a reminder of where he was supposed to go, who he was supposed to greet. Marcus didn't respond. His gaze stayed fixed on me. Bryce across the room noticed the pause and read it the only way he knew how, like opportunity. I saw him step forward with that bright, hungry smile smoothing his jacket again, preparing to be the first one to catch Marcus's attention. "Mr. Halden," Bryce's voice lifted, respectful, rehearsed. Marcus moved before Bryce could finish, not toward the central table, not toward the executives holding out, their hands. He stepped away from them, straight through the space where people were clustered, and for the first time that night, the room truly shifted. Bodies parted without anyone being told. Conversations softened like they'd been pressed down. Glasses hovered near lips and didn't move. A staff member froze mid-step with a tray in her hands, eyes wide like she wasn't sure whether to keep moving or disappear. Marcus walked with a purpose that didn't look like power for show. It looked like instinct, like something in him had locked onto a point and wouldn't release. Every step he took toward the far table made the room quieter, not because he asked for silence, but because people didn't know what they were watching yet and didn't want to miss it. I stayed seated. I kept my hands still. My heart thudded once, hard, then settled into a steady beat that felt like it belonged to someone else. In my mind, time folded. I saw Marcus again in that old college library, elbows, on the table, face lit by the green-shaded lamp as he whispered, "Say it again. I want to understand the way you see it." I remembered the way he used to say my name like it was something he didn't want to waste. I hadn't let myself think of that for years. Not because I'd forgotten, because remembering cost too much. Marcus reached my table and stopped. Up close, the years were clearer. The man before me wore his success in the cut of his suit and the steadiness of his posture, but I could still see the boy he'd been in the softness around his eyes. His breath came out slowly, like he was trying to control something sharp inside him. His lips parted as if he was about to speak and found he didn't trust his own voice. Behind him, I could feel Bryce drawing nearer. I didn't look at my son, but I could feel his presence, the tight coil of his anticipation, the belief that this moment was finally his. Marcus's gaze dropped to my face, then to my hands resting neatly on, my lap, then back to my eyes, and when he spoke, it wasn't loud, it wasn't for the room, it was for me. "Iris," he said, quietly, like my name still belonged somewhere in his mouth. My chest tightened. For a second, I couldn't breathe properly, not because I was about to cry, but because I was trying not to. There are emotions you can manage in private: grief, regret, longing. But when they show up in public with witnesses, they become dangerous. "Mr. Halden," I replied, forcing the words out steady. I chose the title because it was armor, because calling him Marcus in front of all these people would have been the kind of truth Bryce didn't deserve to witness yet. Marcus flinched slightly, just enough to show he felt the distance I'd placed between us. His eyes searched my face like he was looking for proof that I was real. He started, then stopped, swallowing. The sound of his breath was too loud in the quiet. Someone behind him cleared their throat, softly, a reminder of the room, the agenda, the central table, waiting like a throne. Marcus didn't turn around. Bryce finally stepped into view at Marcus's shoulder, smile stretched wide, voice warm with polished respect. "Sir, welcome. I'm Bryce Freeman. It's an honor." Marcus didn't look at him, not even a glance. The dismissal was so complete it made my skin prickle. Bryce's smile faltered for half a second, then snapped back into place, strained now. Marcus's eyes stayed on mine, and his voice lowered again, almost like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "It's been," he said, then shook his head once, as if numbers couldn't hold what he meant. His hand lifted slowly, not reaching for my shoulder, not touching my face, nothing invasive, just extending toward my lap the way a man offers help to someone standing at the edge of something. His palm hovered, waiting for permission. I felt every eye in the room without looking at them. I felt Bryce's breath hitch beside us. I felt the weight of 30 years of silence pressing down on my chest, and underneath that weight, something else, an old, stubborn dignity that refused to let me shake. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed gently, warm and steady, and for a moment the room disappeared again. The only thing I could feel was the fact that Marcus Halden was holding my hand like I mattered, like he had been waiting to do it for decades. And Bryce, my own son, stood right there, invisible, ignored, watching a man he worshipped take his mother as if she was the only person in the room. Marcus didn't release my hand when the room began to breathe again. People shifted, murmurs tried to return, but they came out thin and uncertain, like nobody trusted their own voice after what they'd just seen. Bryce stood beside us with his smile still glued on, but the corners of his mouth twitched, as if his face couldn't decide whether to perform or fall apart. Marcus kept his eyes on me, and that alone made the whole room feel off balance, because men like him aren't supposed to move by feeling. They're supposed to move by schedule. But Marcus moved like the schedule had cracked. "Sir," someone said carefully from the central table, a man with a practiced grin and a posture that screamed executive. "We were about to begin the program. If you'd like to take your seat, we can start with your remarks." The word remarks floated in the air like an expectation, a gentle reminder of protocol. Marcus didn't answer right away. His thumb pressed once, lightly, against the back of my hand, one small touch that sent a strange heat through my chest. Then he turned, still holding my hand, and began walking toward the front of the room, not toward the central table where the executives waited, but toward the small stage set up near the band, where a podium stood under a spotlight and a microphone waited like it had been rehearsing speeches all evening. People stepped out of his way fast, eyes following us in quick, hungry movements. I rose because he guided me up, because he didn't drag me, didn't yank. He moved as if I had choice, and somehow that made it harder to resist. Bryce followed half a step behind, trying to look like he belonged in the moment, like this was part of his plan and not the complete reversal of it. The host, a smooth-talking man in a tux, stood near the podium with a small stack of cards in his hand, blinking like a man watching his script get stolen. "Mr. Halden," he began, voice bright, "we're honored." Marcus lifted one hand slightly, not rude, just final. The host stopped mid-sentence. "May I?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the microphone. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it that made the host hand it over without hesitation. No one questioned him. At this level, schedules bend. In that moment, I understood something about power I'd forgotten. The loudest person doesn't run the room. The person everyone is afraid to interrupt does. Marcus stepped to the mic and looked out at the crowd. The room settled into a silence so complete I could hear the soft hum of the lights above us. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't do the usual warm opening people expect from a man with money and a stage. He stood there for a beat, letting the quiet stretch long enough to make the room lean in. Then he spoke, voice steady, not theatrical. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I know you're expecting the usual end-of-year speech, numbers, targets, congratulations." A soft ripple of laughter tried to rise, died quickly. Marcus's eyes moved slowly across the faces, officers, spouses, polished executives, then drifted downward as if he was looking past them, past their nice clothes and careful smiles, all the way back to the beginning. When I was in college, he continued, I didn't have connections. I didn't have a safety net. I had a scholarship, 2 jobs, and a notebook I guarded like it was my future. His voice tightened slightly on the last word, not enough for most people to catch, but I caught it. I felt my stomach go cold because I remembered that notebook. I remembered nights in the library when Marcus would push it toward me and ask me to look, ask me what I thought, as if my mind mattered more than my background. Marcus paused, and the pause wasn't for effect. It felt like restraint, like he was holding back something sharp. People like to tell stories about success, he said, and most of those stories have been cleaned up, made simple, made comfortable. His gaze flicked briefly to the central table, then back out. But the truth is, the foundation of what we built was not a straight line. It was struggle. It was risk. It was the kind of hunger that makes you decide you either climb out or you die where you are. The room stayed still. Even the servers near the doors had stopped moving, trays held mid-air. Bryce stood off to the side, posture rigid, eyes bright with attention that looked like pride until you looked closer and saw fear underneath it. Marcus's voice lowered. There was someone back then, he said, who saw farther than I did. Someone who could take a problem and turn it around in her mind like she was polishing it until the answer showed itself. My throat tightened. My fingers curled slightly at my sides. I kept my face composed, but inside something started to tremble. Old memories, old choices, old sacrifices coming back like they had been waiting for a door to open. Marcus inhaled slowly. She wasn't the kind of person the world celebrates, he continued, and I felt those words like a blade because I knew what he meant. He meant she didn't come from money. She didn't come from the right family. She wasn't the kind of name that got invited into rooms like this without being asked to shrink first. Marcus's eyes moved again, scanning the crowd, and I could see people trying to figure out where this was going, their curiosity tightening into focus. She never asked for credit, he said, and because she never asked, the world never offered. The air felt thick. Bryce shifted his weight, jaw flexing hard. Marcus turned slightly, angling his body, not fully toward the crowd, but toward me, as if he was finally ready to name what he'd been circling. His gaze found mine, and the room seemed to hold its breath with him. And tonight? Marcus said, voice quiet but carrying. I'm not going to let that happen again. He lifted one hand and gestured toward me. No dramatic flourish, just a simple motion that placed me in the light without asking my permission to be invisible. She was the mind behind what built this, he said, and the words landed like thunder in a room that had been pretending it didn't believe in storms. The silence that followed Marcus's words had a weight to it, like the whole room had been leaned on at once. Faces that had been smiling for photos a moment ago went still, eyes sharpening, mouths parting slightly as if everyone was trying to decide whether they'd heard correctly. Somewhere near the back, a fork clinked against a plate, small accidental sound that felt loud because the room had stopped pretending it was just a dinner. Marcus didn't rush to fill the quiet. He let it sit, let it press down because he understood what people do when something unexpected happens. They look for an exit. He didn't give them one. He kept his hand resting lightly on the edge of the podium, gaze steady, voice calm. The kind of calm that makes you listen even when you don't want to. Some of you know the story you've been told, he said, how this company started. A young man with a big idea and nothing to lose. A few heads nodded reflexively. The origin story they'd been fed. The clean version. Marcus's eyes dipped briefly toward me again, and I felt my stomach tighten because I knew what was coming next. The truth, he continued, is that I didn't have the big idea. The words moved through the room like a cold draft. I saw one executive blink hard. Another man's smile froze halfway and then fell away. Bryce, standing off to the side, looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Marcus shifted his stance slightly, and in that movement I caught a flicker of the boy he once was, the boy who used to look around before speaking, making sure no one was listening, because the wrong ears could turn dreams into punishment. Back then, Marcus said, I was working 2 jobs. I was sleeping in places I'm not proud of, and I was hungry in a way that makes you desperate. His voice didn't shake, but it held an old ache. I thought I needed money. What I actually needed was a mind that could see structure where I only saw chaos. My throat tightened. Heat rose behind my eyes, not tears yet, more like the body preparing for impact. Marcus leaned closer to the microphone, not louder, just more intimate, as if he was inviting the entire ballroom to step into a memory. We were sitting in the student center one evening, he said, watching people buy the same things over and over. Books, supplies, meals, rides across campus, each purchase separate, each person paying more because everything was fragmented. My fingers curled slowly. I remembered that night. I remembered the cold fries on the table, the way Marcus's pencil had been worn down almost to the metal because he kept chewing it when he was thinking. I remembered him complaining, not as a spoiled man, but as a tired one. Too many steps, too many middlemen, too many people getting rich off small needs. Marcus nodded once, like he could see it again. She said something simple, he continued, and his gaze found me. She said, "Stop selling to people like they're strangers every time they walk in. Build a system that treats them like members." A murmur ran through the room. Membership. Familiar word now, but back then it had been a seed. Marcus's voice remained steady. "She mapped it out right there on a napkin," he said, and I felt the humiliation of it. How small my contribution had been kept, how easily it could have been thrown away. Not just a product, a way of thinking, a way of keeping people loyal by respecting their time and their dignity, a single account that followed them, a simple network, one place to manage recurring needs so people didn't have to be bled dry in small pieces. He didn't call it fancy names. He didn't dress it up. He described it like a real idea, born out of real life. "She told me to stop chasing quick money," Marcus said, "and build trust instead. To make the service clean, predictable, fair. Because when people feel respected, they return." I could hear the room processing it, because everyone there understood the power of that principle in business. Bryce's face had turned a strange color, like pride and shame were wrestling inside him, and neither one wanted to lose. Marcus paused. The air felt tight. "That napkin became a notebook," he said. "That notebook became a pitch. That pitch became my first investor meeting." He swallowed once. "And here's the part I don't say in interviews." His voice lowered just enough to feel like confession. I kept her name out of it. The words cut cleaner than anything he'd said so far. My stomach dropped. Some part of me had known he would say it, but hearing it out loud in front of everyone still felt like being touched where old scars live. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "Not because she didn't deserve it," he said quickly, and his eyes held mine in a way that felt like apology and regret tangled together. "Because I was afraid." He let that word hang. "Afraid of my family, afraid of the people who already told me she wasn't acceptable, afraid that if her name was attached to mine, the doors I was trying to force open would slam shut." The room stayed silent, but now it was a different silence. Less curiosity, more discomfort. Marcus's voice remained controlled, but the truth in it was heavy. "I was raised to believe survival means compromise," he said, "so I compromised." His gaze drifted, then returned to me. "She walked away before I could even pretend I was brave enough to protect her," he said, and my chest tightened because the memory rose sharp. My decision, my leaving, my own fear disguised as strength. "She didn't leave because she didn't matter," Marcus said. "She left because she knew the world around me would destroy me. or destroy her trying to stay. The words landed deep, and for the first time that night I felt the room's respect shift, not just toward me, but toward the kind of sacrifice people don't like to acknowledge because it makes them feel small. Marcus's voice hardened slightly, not angry, just resolved. He lifted his chin and looked out at the crowd. "So when I tell you she was the mind behind what built this," he said, "understand what I'm really saying. She didn't write the code. She didn't raise the capital. She didn't sit in those early boardrooms." He paused, then added, quieter but firmer, "But the structure, the way we thought about people, loyalty, dignity, that was hers." He let the words settle. "Every opportunity in this room," Marcus said, "traces back to her." The sound wasn't dramatic at first. It wasn't the kind of crash you hear in movies where everybody gasps on cue. It was a small, helpless slip, glass against skin, then glass against air, then a sharp, clean crack against the floor that traveled through the ballroom like a bell. Heads turned in a new wave, not toward Marcus now, but toward the sound of someone losing control. Champagne spread in a bright little fan across the polished wood, catching the light like a mistake that refused to be ignored. Bryce Freeman stood near the center table with his hand still half curled, fingers trembling like they'd tried to hold on and failed. For a second, he stared down at the broken stemware as if it had betrayed him. Then he looked up, and his eyes met mine for the first time that night without a mask. I didn't know what expression he expected to find on my face: rage, satisfaction, shame. He'd spent years training me to manage myself so he could stay comfortable. He probably expected me to rescue him, to soften what Marcus had just done by shrinking back into the corner, pretending I wasn't the point. But something in me had shifted the moment Marcus said my name out loud. The moment he called my mind the foundation, not my background the burden. I didn't glare. At Bryce. I didn't smile either. I simply looked at him. Clear, steady, like a mirror he couldn't turn away from. Bryce's face was burning red beneath his brown skin, the kind of heat that comes from humiliation mixed with panic. Around him, people reacted in the careful ways people do when they want to witness but also want to survive. A few executives leaned away slightly, as if embarrassment could stain. Someone at the central table bent to murmur to another, lips tight. A woman near the front raised her hand to her mouth, not to gasp, but to hide the way she was watching. Even the staff moved differently, stepping around the spill with a quiet efficiency that said they had seen messes before. But not this kind. Marcus stood at the microphone, still composed, still holding the room's attention like it belonged to him. He didn't comment on the glass. He didn't pause to let Bryce recover. That was the cruelest part of it, and also the most honest. Marcus didn't need to punish Bryce. Ignoring him was enough. The room could feel the shift. Everyone could. One moment, Bryce had been an eager young officer, hoping to be noticed. The next, he was just a man standing too close to a truth that made his ambitions look small. I watched Bryce's throat work as he swallowed hard. His shoulders lifted slightly as if he was trying to pull himself taller, trying to climb back into dignity. But you can't climb out of a moment like that with posture. He glanced around and the room's eyes met his and slid away, because nobody wanted to be caught on the wrong side of Marcus Halden's attention. Bryce's gaze returned to the stage, to Marcus, and I saw the exact second he realized what had happened. The favor he'd been chasing had not only bypassed him, it had landed on the very person he'd tried to hide. His strategy had flipped on itself. He brought me as a prop, and I became the headline. He brought me to stand behind him, and I was placed in the light. I felt something in my chest loosen, a knot I didn't know I'd been carrying. Not joy, not revenge, more like clarity, the kind that makes you stop begging for a version of love that keeps asking you to shrink. The band had stopped playing entirely now. The musicians stood still, instruments in hand, eyes flicking between Marcus and the crowd like they were waiting to see what kind of night this had turned into. A man from the central table, older, silver hair, expensive watch, took 2 slow steps toward Marcus with a smile that looked unsure. "Sir," he said softly, "this is extraordinary." He looked toward me, and for the first time that evening, his gaze didn't skim me like furniture. It landed and stayed, respectful. "Ma'am," he added, and the word ma'am came out with weight, the kind of weight Bryce had never given it when he spoke to me lately. Another person followed, an executive woman with neat braids and sharp eyes, nodding toward me as if she was seeing something she'd missed all along. "We should have known," she murmured, not loudly but loud enough for the nearby tables to catch. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. The respect moved through the room like warmth spreading, not in applause yet, but in the way people started repositioning themselves, turning their bodies toward me, adjusting their expressions, deciding which side of history they wanted to be seen on. Bryce saw it too. It was written in the way the room had pivoted. I could feel his desperation rising, the frantic need to grab the moment back. He bent down quickly, reached for a napkin, wiped at the spill like cleaning it could undo what had just been spoken. His hands shook. Glass crunched under his shoe, and the sound made him flinch. Then he straightened too fast, the chair behind him scraping sharply as it shifted. He looked up again, eyes wet now. Not with sadness, but with the humiliation of being exposed in front of people he wanted to impress. His lips parted as if he was about to say something smart, something polished, something that could reframe this night as a misunderstanding. But no words came out, only a strained breath. Bryce's jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. He took one rigid step back from the table, eyes darting from Marcus to me, to the executives watching him like he was a cautionary tale. Then, with a suddenness that made the whole room tense again, my son pushed his chair away and stood abruptly, face burning like it couldn't bear the spotlight it had begged for. Bryce didn't explode. He didn't throw a chair or shout. That would have been easier for him, something loud to drown out what he was feeling. Instead, he did what a man does when the room finally sees through him. He ran. He stood there for a beat, face burning, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. Then he turned sharply and walked away from the central table with stiff, urgent steps. His shoulders were squared like he was still trying to look dignified, but the speed betrayed him. The scrape of his shoes against the floor cut through the quiet. Heads followed him in slow motion, eyes tracking him like they didn't want to, but couldn't stop. The room had returned to breathing, but it wasn't normal breathing. It was the kind that happens after something has been shattered and everyone is pretending they don't smell the smoke. Bryce pushed through a cluster of officers near the aisle without apologizing. Someone shifted out of his way too late and got bumped. I saw the officer's expression harden, then soften quickly when he remembered who Bryce thought he was. Bryce didn't look back. He kept moving, past the tables, past the band, past the servers standing frozen with trays, toward the doors like the building itself was too small to hold his humiliation. A few whispers rose immediately, quiet, sharp, cutting. "That's Freeman. Is that his mother? Did he know?" He looked like he didn't. Poor woman. The last whisper landed on me like a hand I didn't ask for. Poor woman. I had been a poor woman. I had been a tired woman. I had been a woman who stretched dollars until they cried. But sitting in that ballroom, under that soft, expensive light, hearing my name spoken with respect, I didn't feel poor. I felt exposed. There's a difference. Poor is a condition. Exposed is a wound. I watched Bryce reach the doors. He hesitated for half a second, as if the reality of leaving was starting to hit him, as if he suddenly remembered he had brought me here, and now he was trying to decide whether abandoning me would look worse than staying. The people at the entrance didn't move to stop him. The room didn't call him back. Even that was a kind of judgment. Bryce shoved the doors open and disappeared into the hallway, and the sound of them swinging closed behind him felt final in a way that made my stomach tighten. My instinct, the oldest one, rose up quick. Go after him. Fix it. Cover it. Smooth it over so he doesn't look bad. That instinct had kept me bending for years because motherhood teaches you to hold your child's pride like it's a fragile thing, even when it's sharp enough to cut you. My body leaned forward slightly before I stopped myself. I felt the chair under me, solid. I felt the floor under my shoes. I felt the weight of my own breath. And in that second, I made a choice that felt like stepping out of a cage I didn't know I was still in. I stayed seated. I did not follow him. I did not rise to save his image. I watched the door he'd left through and let the shame be his, not mine. A soft murmur rolled through the room, then died as Marcus spoke again. Not into the microphone now, but to the nearest executive, his voice low and controlled. People were trying to recover. Chairs shifted, glasses were refilled. The band began playing again, a careful melody meant to paste a sense of normal over what had just happened. But the normal didn't stick. Not fully. Because everybody in that room had just watched power choose a woman seated near the wall over the man who had dragged her there to be hidden. An executive woman approached my table with a gentle smile that didn't feel fake. "Ms. Freeman," she said, respectful. "Are you all right?" I nodded once. "I'm fine," I answered, because I wasn't going to give them my pain as entertainment. Marcus walked toward me a moment later. No entourage now, just him. His face looked composed, but his eyes held something unsettled, as if he was still trying to understand how I was sitting here in front of him after all these years. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he said softly, leaning slightly so only I could hear. "I can have someone take you home." The word "someone" made me tense, because I could already picture Bryce using that, turning it into another story about how I embarrassed him and then got escorted out like a problem. "No," I said quietly. "I came with my son." Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the doors Bryce had stormed through, then back to me. "Your son left," he said. His voice held no judgment, just fact. The truth cut harder than any insult. I swallowed, held my chin up. "I see that," I replied. Marcus straightened slightly, and I could feel the room watching again, trying to decide what he would do next. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce anything. He simply made a decision like a man who was used to choosing and being obeyed. "I'm taking you home," he said. Not a question, not a grand gesture, a responsibility. I hesitated for a breath, then nodded once, because refusing would have turned this into a fight in front of people who had already watched enough. Marcus offered his arm again, not possessive, not claiming, just steady. As we walked out together, I felt eyes follow us, not cruel now, but curious, reverent, confused. In the lobby, away from the ballroom's noise, the silence returned, but it felt different. More private, more dangerous. Marcus's car was waiting at the curb like it had been waiting for him all night. A driver stepped out, opened the rear door, but Marcus waved him off with a small motion and opened the door himself. When I slid into the seat, the leather was cool against my palms. Marcus got in beside me, close enough that I could smell clean cologne and something beneath it. Memory, maybe. The car rolled forward smoothly, the hotel lights sliding away behind us. For a long moment, Marcus didn't speak. He looked out the window as if he was gathering himself. Then he turned slightly toward me, voice low, words careful like they mattered. I never stopped looking for the woman who taught me how to think. Bryce didn't call first. He didn't text. He didn't do the polite thing and cool off like a grown man who knows he crossed a line. He showed up. The pounding started just after midnight. hard, uneven hits that made my front door rattle in its frame, like somebody was trying to break in without fully committing to breaking in. I was still wearing my dress from the dinner, shoes off, feet aching, sitting at the edge of my bed with my purse open in my lap because my hands didn't know what else to hold. Marcus had dropped me off and driven away without lingering, but his words were still sitting in my chest like a warm stone, heavy, confusing, impossible to ignore. The pounding came again, then Bryce's voice through the door, tight and low. "Open up!" Not Mom, not please. Open up. I stood slowly, every nerve in me going alert the way it used to when Bryce was a teenager and came home smelling like trouble. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Bryce was on the porch, jacket gone, tie loosened, hair slightly out of place. His eyes were bright in a way I recognized. Anger, dressed up as certainty. I opened the door just enough to stand in the gap. "It's late," I said, keeping my voice even. Bryce pushed the door wider with his shoulder, not hard, but with the entitlement of a man who never expects resistance. He stepped inside like my home belonged to his mood. "Don't start with that," he snapped, pacing 2 steps into the living room and turning back to me. His chest rose and fell like he'd run here, not driven. "You know what you did tonight?" The words came out sharp, but his face wasn't theatrical. It was strained, embarrassed, furious, the look of a man who feels exposed and is trying to blame someone else for it. I closed the door behind him quietly. I didn't lock it. I didn't want the sound of a lock turning to become the moment he decided I was against him. Bryce's eyes moved over me, and I saw him register that I hadn't changed clothes, that I hadn't crawled into bed and disappeared. That bothered him. He wanted me small, quiet, ashamed. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I sat where you told me to sit." Bryce let out a laugh that wasn't humor. "Oh, don't do that," he said, voice rising. "Don't act innocent. Don't act like you didn't know what was happening." He stepped closer, then stopped himself, hands fisting and unfisting at his sides, like he was trying to keep control of his own body. That man, Marcus Halden, he made me look like a fool. The name came out like a curse. In front of everybody. I held Bryce's gaze without flinching. "You made yourself look like a fool," I said quietly. The words landed, and I saw something flash in his eyes, hurt first, then rage, because he wasn't used to me saying the part out loud. "You see?" he snapped, pointing at me as if I'd proven his point. "This is what I mean. This right here. You don't know when to stop." My stomach tightened. "Stop what, Bryce?" He ran a hand over his face, dragged it down slowly like he was wiping away the night. "You were never enough for that room," he said, and the sentence came out so fast it sounded like it had been stored up for years. He stared at me like he expected me to collapse. "Not because you're a bad mother, not because you didn't work hard, but because that world doesn't care about struggle stories. They care about Polish. They care about who you look like." He leaned forward slightly, voice harsh but controlled. "And I have been fighting my whole life to not look like where I came from." The truth in it hit like a slap because it wasn't new. It was just finally honest. "So you brought me tonight as proof," I said, keeping my voice calm. "A prop, a picture." Bryce's jaw flexed. "Yes!" he burst, then caught himself, eyes widening like he didn't mean to say it out loud. He swallowed hard, shoulders lifting, trying to reel his words back in. "I mean, Ma, listen, everybody brings someone. I didn't have a wife to bring. I didn't want to bring some random date and look unserious." His voice tightened again. "You were supposed to help me." The word "supposed" to made my hands go cold. "Help you," I repeated, "by staying invisible." Bryce's eyes flicked away for a second, then snapped back, angry again because I wasn't letting him rewrite it. "I told you to stay in the back," he said, voice low now, dangerous in its calm. "I told you not to talk too much. I told you not to embarrass me, and you still—" "I still what?" I cut in softly. sat down and existed. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. His breathing changed, faster now. He looked like he wanted to throw something but didn't trust himself. "You should have stayed invisible," he said again, quieter, almost like a plea. "That was the whole point. Do you know what it feels like to finally be close to the kind of power that can change your life, and then watch it go to you?" His voice cracked on the last word, and for a split second I saw the little boy in him, the boy who used to beg me not to come into his school because he didn't want his friends to see my worn shoes. Then the man returned, harder. "Now everybody's gonna talk," he said. "They're gonna see me as the guy who didn't even know his own mother's history, the guy who brought his mother as a pity move." His eyes shone, and he blinked hard like he refused to cry in front of me. "You cost me tonight," he said, voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "You cost me the moment I've been working for." I felt something settle in me then, an old sadness turning into something sharper. "Bryce," I said, "I didn't cost you anything. You tried to trade me." Bryce stepped closer, and the air between us tightened. His voice dropped into the tone I'd heard too many times in this house, the one that wasn't loud, but was meant to make me obey. "Don't forget something," he said, eyes hard now, each word clipped. "You live here because I allow it. You wear nice things because I pay for them. You eat because I put food in this house. So don't you ever stand in front of me like you're the reason I'm anything." Marcus Halden didn't call the next morning. He didn't send flowers or a dramatic message that would have made the night feel like some movie. Days passed instead, quiet days where my house felt smaller, not because the rooms changed, but because Bryce's words kept echoing in the corners. He moved around me with a clipped efficiency, speaking only when necessary, the way a man acts when he believes silence is punishment. I cooked, I cleaned, I kept my face steady, but inside I was rearranging myself, testing what it felt like to live without constantly trying to soften my son. The strangest part was that the dinner hadn't just exposed my past to the world, it had exposed my present to me. On. The third day, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a moment, heart tapping a cautious rhythm, then answered. "Hello?" There was a brief pause on the other end, like the person had to adjust to the sound of my voice after years of imagining it. "Miss Freeman," a man's voice said, low and controlled. "It's Marcus Halden." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Mr. Halden," I replied, keeping the title again, not because I didn't remember who he was, but because I needed something between us that wasn't memory. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. His tone held no romance, no smooth charm. It held something steadier, concern, careful and restrained, like he didn't want to insult me by assuming closeness he hadn't earned. "No," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. "I'm fine." Marcus didn't rush to fill the silence. He let my lie sit there, then spoke softly. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "Not about the speech. Not about the room," he paused. "About you." That simple separation made my chest tighten. Most people who reach out after a night like that want to talk about what happened, the moment, the impact, the story. Marcus was asking about the person carrying it. "You didn't have to," I said, and the words sounded polite, but they were also a warning. Don't pull me into something I can't control. Marcus's voice stayed even. "I know," he said, "but I couldn't stop thinking about the way your son looked at you." My stomach went cold. "He was embarrassed," I said quickly, because that's what mothers do. They translate cruelty into something gentler so they can survive it. Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Embarrassed?" he repeated, and I heard the skepticism in the way he said it. Then, "Would you meet me for coffee? Somewhere public, somewhere comfortable. No agenda." I hesitated. I could already hear Bryce's voice in my head. Don't bring trouble into my life. But another voice, older, quieter, rose up beneath it. Don't keep shrinking just because somebody trained you to. All right, I said, surprising myself. 1 hour. We met at a modest cafe not far from where I lived. Warm lighting, soft music, the kind of place where people came to be left alone. Marcus arrived without a crowd, no security hovering, dressed simply, like he was trying to remove every symbol of what he'd become so he could sit across from me as a man, not a headline. When he saw me, his eyes softened, but he didn't reach for my hand. He didn't take liberties. He pulled out my chair, waited until I sat, then sat himself. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I don't do sentimental," I told him, and I meant it. "And I don't want pity." Marcus nodded once. "I didn't come to pity you," he said. "I came because I recognized something." He watched me for a moment like he was reading the space between my words. "You're careful," he said, "not shy, not weak, careful. The way people get when they've been corrected too many times for simply existing." My throat tightened, and I looked down at my hands, then back up. "You don't know my life," I said, sharper than I intended. Marcus didn't flinch. "No," he agreed. "I don't." He took a slow breath. "But I know control when I see it." We talked about safe things at first, work, the city, the years between. Marcus asked questions like a man who wasn't trying to pry, just trying to understand where the missing pages were. I answered carefully, giving him pieces but not the whole truth. Then, midway through my coffee, my phone buzzed on the table. Bryce's name flashed across the screen. My body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders tightening, breath shallow. I picked it up quickly. "Hello?" Bryce's voice came through sharp and impatient, not caring who might be, listening. "Where are you?" "Out," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'll be back soon." "Out where?" he pressed, and I heard that familiar edge, the one that wasn't worry, it was possession. "I'm handling something," I said. "Don't handle anything," Bryce snapped. "You're not about to start acting brand new because some man said your name on a microphone. Come home, now." My stomach clenched. I glanced at Marcus without meaning to, and his face had gone still, eyes focused, jaw set, not angry, just alert. I lowered my voice further. "Bryce, I'll be home in an hour." Bryce laughed once, cold. "An hour," he repeated. "Iris, don't test me." The way he used my name, not Ma, hit like a slap. "I'm not a child," I said softly, and my voice shook despite me. Bryce's tone dropped into something quiet and sharp. "In my house," he said, "you are what I say you are." The line landed, and for a moment I couldn't move. The call ended. I sat there, phone in my hand, heart beating too hard. Marcus didn't speak right away. He watched me the way you watch someone after a fall, making sure they don't pretend they're fine and stand up too fast. Then he leaned forward slightly, voice low, controlled. "That," he said, "isn't respect." His eyes held mine, steady and unblinking. "That is control." I swallowed hard, shame rising, but Marcus didn't let me hide inside it. "I never found you," he added quietly, and his voice shifted. Less accusation, more confession. "But I built everything the way you taught me." Marcus's words sat between us like something fragile and heavy at the same time. "I never found you, but I built everything the way you taught me." The cafe noise kept moving. Cups clinking, chairs sliding, someone laughing at a table near the window. Yet it felt like the air around us had turned private, sealed off from ordinary life. I stared at Marcus, trying to decide whether to believe what he was saying or whether this was the kind of guilt-rich speech men give when they want to feel clean. "You built everything," I said slowly, keeping my voice level because my pride wouldn't let me sound shaken. "And you're telling me you did it for me." Marcus's eyes didn't flinch. "Not for you," he corrected gently. "From you." That small shift hit harder than the first statement. From you. Like my mind hadn't just helped him once. Like it had been the soil he kept planting in. I felt the heat of anger rise, quick and sharp. And you never once reached. Out? I asked. Not accusing, just cutting. Marcus exhaled slowly, gaze dropping to the coffee cup in front of him, like he didn't want to look at the part of himself that had failed. I tried, he said. I tried in the ways a coward tries. He lifted his eyes back to mine, and the honesty in them was steady, not theatrical. I asked around. I called the old number I had until it stopped connecting. I went back to the campus, talked to one professor who still remembered you, but she didn't have a forwarding address. His jaw tightened, and I caught that old familiar tension, the one he used to get when he knew the world had rules he didn't want to accept. And then my life moved fast, he admitted. Investors, lawyers, meetings, my family tightening their grip, and every time I thought I should search harder, I told myself you had chosen silence, that you didn't want to be found. The words landed with an old ache. I had chosen silence. I had pushed him, away on purpose, telling myself I was saving him from his family's cruelty and saving myself from being crushed under it. But I hadn't expected silence to become 30 years. Marcus leaned forward slightly, voice low, careful. That night you left, he said, you told me something I never forgot. My fingers tightened around my cup. You said, if you build this by stepping on people, it will eventually step on you. I felt my stomach flip because I remembered saying something like that, standing outside his car with my coat pulled tight, forcing my voice to stay calm while my chest was breaking. Marcus's eyes stayed on me. That sentence became a rule in my head, he said, a rule I used when I had every reason not to. I scoffed softly, but it wasn't humor. You're a billionaire, Marcus, I said, and the name slipped out before I could stop it. Don't tell me you stayed clean in a world like that. Marcus didn't smile. He nodded. Once, acknowledging the truth. I didn't stay clean, he said, but I stayed restrained. He lifted one hand, palm down, as if pressing something flat. You taught me restraint when I was still hungry enough to justify anything. He paused, then added, there were moments I could have crushed competitors, moments I could have cut corners, moments I could have played people the way people tried to play me. His gaze sharpened slightly. And every time I heard your voice telling me not to build an empire that required me to become someone you wouldn't respect. The words hit me in a place I didn't have armor for. I had spent decades thinking I disappeared from his life like a closed book. He was telling me I'd been the margin notes. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a slim folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just a few pages clipped together. He set it on the table between us without sliding it toward me yet. I don't want you to take my word for it, he said, because you shouldn't. He flipped the top page and pointed to a paragraph. Early on, he said, when we started hiring, I refused to let them pay people like they were disposable. His finger tapped the paper once. We built in wage transparency for entry roles, a floor that rises with profit. They told me it would cost too much. He looked at me. I did it anyway, because I remembered the way you used to stretch your money and still give somebody else your last $5. My throat tightened. Marcus turned the page. When the company grew, he continued, they wanted me to hide behind structures. No accountability, no face, no responsibility. He paused. I put my name on decisions. I built an ethics office that reports directly to me, not because I'm a saint, but because you told me power without accountability is just entitlement. He turned one more page, and this time his finger hovered over a short section. And this, he said, voice quieter now, is what I'm proudest of. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't have to. The heading was simple. a scholarship program tied to community colleges, designed for students who were working jobs and carrying family burdens, students who had ideas but no access. Marcus's voice softened. "I never knew where you were," he said, "but I kept building as if you might one day look at what I made and recognize your values living inside it." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The anger I'd been holding started to drain into something heavier, grief maybe, or the strange relief of realizing I hadn't been erased, just misplaced. "So all this time," I whispered, and the words surprised me by slipping out, "I wasn't gone." Marcus held my gaze, steady, careful. "No," he said, "you were the blueprint." The sentence settled in me like a truth I didn't know I needed. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't some sugary second chance. It was recognition across time. Two lives shaped by the same choice, meeting again with all the consequences intact. Marcus's eyes searched mine, and his voice dropped until it felt like it belonged only to us. "Did you ever stop caring?" he asked quietly. The meeting didn't happen in some dramatic boardroom with cameras and security standing like statues. Marcus didn't turn my pain into a performance. He did something quieter, and somehow that felt heavier, because quiet consequences are the ones you can't talk your way out of. He asked me to come to a small conference room at one of the company's local offices, late afternoon when most people had already gone home. No spectacle, no crowd, just the truth in a room with nowhere to hide. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to keep everything inside my house, private and contained, the way I'd been trained to do for years, handle it, swallow it, move on. But another part of me, the part that had sat by a wall in a ballroom and been spoken into the light, was tired of swallowing. So I went. The building was sleek but not flashy, glass and clean lines, the kind of space that smells like fresh coffee and printer paper. Marcus met me in the lobby himself, not as a billionaire greeting a guest, but as a man trying not to lose control of his own emotions. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice steady. I nodded once and followed him down a quiet hallway. He didn't touch my arm. He didn't rush me. He just walked beside me like he understood that even walking into a room like this was a test of my dignity. The conference room was small, simple, a table, 4 chairs, a pitcher of water, no dramatic skyline view, no giant logo on the wall. One other person sat at the far end, an older woman with calm eyes and a notepad in front of her. She stood when we entered and gave me a respectful nod. "Miss Freeman," she said softly. Marcus introduced her only as someone he trusted to witness, not to punish. That word witness made my stomach tighten because it told me this was real. This wasn't just talk. Marcus waited until I sat before he sat, leaving the chair beside me empty, as if the space itself was reserved for what was coming. "Your son is on his way," Marcus said. "He doesn't know why." I stared at the wood grain of the table and felt a slow heat move up my chest. Bryce never did well with not knowing. It made him cruel. The door opened 10 minutes later. Bryce walked in like he was entering a room he believed he owned. His suit was sharp, hair neat, face controlled, the kind of control men put on when they're trying to prove they weren't shaken. But his eyes gave him away, uneasy, scanning, searching for the angle. When he saw me, his mouth tightened. Not guilt, irritation, as if my presence here was an inconvenience. Then he saw Marcus, and his posture shifted instantly. Respect slid onto him like a jacket. "Mr. Halden," Bryce said quickly, stepping forward with his hand extended. Marcus didn't take his hand. He didn't insult him. He simply looked at him until Bryce's arm lowered on its own, awkward and sudden. Bryce swallowed. "Sir, if this is about the dinner—" "It's not," Marcus cut in calmly. The room went still. Bryce blinked, thrown off. Marcus's voice stayed even. "Sit," he said. Not loud, just final. Bryce hesitated, then sat across from me, far enough that he didn't have to feel my breath, close enough that he couldn't pretend I wasn't real. His knee bounced once under the table, a small tell. Marcus folded his hands, gaze steady on Bryce. "You brought your mother to that dinner to be seen," Marcus said, "and then you tried to make her invisible." Bryce's face tightened. "Sir, with respect, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Marcus said, and there was no anger in it, just certainty. He nodded once toward me. "Your mother sat in a room full of people trained to measure worth, and you measured her smaller than strangers did." Bryce's jaw clenched hard. "I didn't—" "You did," Marcus interrupted softly. "You didn't call her your mother. You called her with you. You instructed her like she was a liability." Bryce's eyes flicked to me briefly, and in that glance I saw the old expectation. Say something. Fix it. Protect me. I didn't move. Marcus continued, voice low, controlled. "And after that night," he added, "I heard you speak to her on the phone." Bryce's face changed, a flash of fear, quick and ugly, then covered by offense. "That was private," Bryce snapped. Marcus didn't flinch. "It was revealing," he replied. Bryce's breathing sped up slightly. He tried to sit back, tried to look casual, but the room wasn't letting him perform. The woman with the notepad stayed silent, eyes down, writing nothing. Her presence alone was enough to tell Bryce this wasn't a family argument he could twist. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what control looks like?" he asked Bryce. "It looks like telling someone they live somewhere because you allow it. It looks like using money to shrink a person until they feel like they have to earn basic respect." Bryce's face flushed and his mouth opened as if he was going to argue. But something in him faltered. Not because he was afraid Marcus would fire him, not because he feared consequences, because he was being seen. The version of Bryce he'd hidden under suits and titles, the boy ashamed of his roots, was sitting naked in that chair. His eyes darted to me again, and this time the look wasn't demand. It was panic. "Ma," he said, voice tighter, "why are you doing this?" The words were small, almost childish, and they cracked something in him. I kept my voice calm. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm finally not covering." Bryce's lips pressed together. His throat worked. His eyes shone, and he blinked hard like he hated himself for it. "I didn't mean it," he muttered, and the sentence sounded like it hurt to say. Marcus stayed still. "You meant it enough to live it," he said. "That was the knife." Bryce's shoulders dropped slightly, the first real collapse. He stared down at the table, then whispered, "I was trying to fit in." The admission came out thin, stripped of bravado. He looked up at me then, and something in his face shifted. Not softness, not yet, but a raw exposure. "I erased you because I didn't know how to carry you into that world without them looking at me like I was less," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. He swallowed and forced the next sentence out, quieter, heavier. "I'm sorry," he said, "not because you embarrassed me." His eyes held mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw shame that wasn't defensive. "Because I made you disappear." The room stayed silent after that. Marcus turned his head slightly toward me, gaze steady, voice low like he was giving me my power back. "What do you want done next?" I didn't answer Marcus right away. "What do you want done next?" The question sat in my lap like a sharp tool. It could carve a path or cut somebody open. Bryce's eyes stayed on me, wet but guarded, like he was waiting to see whether I would destroy him now that the room had finally handed me the power too. Marcus didn't rush me. He didn't fill the silence with suggestions. He simply watched, quiet, letting the choice belong to me. And in that moment, I realized something that surprised even me. I didn't want revenge. Not the kind that leaves you looking back later and realizing you became what hurt you. I wanted dignity. I wanted my life back in my own hands. I lifted my chin and spoke carefully because words are the first boundary you draw. I want my name back, I said. Bryce blinked. Marcus's eyes stayed steady. You call me Ma because you need something, I continued, looking directly at Bryce. When you want obedience, you call me Iris, like I'm a roommate you tolerate. Bryce's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I took a slow breath. From today, you will speak to me with respect in every tone, I said. Not the public tone, the private one. Bryce swallowed, shoulders tense. And I will not live in a house where I have to earn basic decency, I added. That sentence changed the air. Bryce's eyes widened slightly, not because he didn't understand, but because he hadn't believed I would ever say it out loud in front of Marcus. I'm moving, I said simply. The word hit Bryce like a shove. Ma, he started, then caught himself, remembering I'd just named what he does with that word. Iris, he corrected, voice tight. Where are you going to go? The question was half concern, half threat. Where are you going to go without me? I looked at him calmly. That's not your concern anymore, I replied. Bryce's nostrils flared. So you're just going to leave? After everything I've done for you? There it was, the ledger. The way he kept score so he could claim ownership. I held his gaze. A child doesn't get to invoice his mother for love, I said quietly. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. His hands clasped together on the table, knuckles pale. Marcus stayed still. He didn't jump in. He didn't correct Bryce on my behalf. That was important to me, because a rescue would have turned me into a passenger again. I wasn't asking for rescue. I was choosing myself. You will keep your job, I told Bryce, and he looked up sharply, hope flashing too fast. Not because you deserve it, I continued, cutting that hope clean, because I refuse to be the kind of mother who ruins her child to prove a point. Bryce's eyes flicked toward Marcus, searching for confirmation, for mercy. Marcus gave him nothing. But you will understand something, I added, voice low. You no longer control me. You will not control my money, my movement, my mouth, or my life. I paused. If you raise your voice at me again, the conversation ends. If you threaten me again, you will not see me until you learn how to speak like a man with character, not power. Bryce's throat worked. He nodded once, stiffly, as if nodding was the only thing he could do without falling apart. Marcus finally spoke, but not to Bryce, to me. How can I support your decision? He asked quietly. Support, not take over, not handle it, support. I felt something loosen in my chest. I'll handle the move, I said. I just need time. Marcus nodded once. You'll have it, he said. The meeting ended without drama. No shouting, no threats. Bryce left first, shoulders rigid, face unreadable, like a man walking out of a room where his old power died quietly. Marcus walked me back to the lobby, not too close, not too far. When we stepped outside, the late afternoon air felt clean against my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without permission. Over the next weeks, I moved into a small apartment across town, nothing flashy but mine. I bought my own groceries. I arranged my own furniture. I slept without listening for Bryce's footsteps, without bracing for his tone. Bryce called sometimes, careful at first, then awkward, then quiet. He didn't suddenly turn into a perfect son. Growth doesn't happen like that. But the control line started to loosen, slowly, painfully, as he learned that access to me was not guaranteed. Marcus checked on me, too. Not every day, not with grand gestures. He would send a simple message, hope you're all right, or call once a week and ask about my day like it mattered. Sometimes we met for coffee. Sometimes we sat in silence, letting the years between us settle without, trying to rewrite them. Trust rebuilt the way old bones heal. Slow, tender, careful. One evening, weeks later, we sat on a bench outside the cafe where we'd first talked, the city lights soft in the distance. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, eyes steady, voice quiet. "Iris?" he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like respect, not possession. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life honoring you from a distance." He paused, then added with a seriousness that felt like a vow instead of nostalgia, "Will you marry me?" We didn't marry under chandeliers or in front of a crowd that wanted to touch the story like it belonged to them. Marcus offered, and I said yes, and then we did it the way I needed to do it. Quietly, cleanly, without giving the world a chance to turn my life into a headline. A small chapel on a weekday afternoon, the kind of place where the air smells like old wood and soft candles. 2 witnesses. A pastor with kind eyes who didn't ask. Invasive questions. No photographers, no long aisle, no dramatic music swelling to make other people emotional. Just me, in a simple cream dress that fit my body like peace, and Marcus, in a dark suit without the billionaire shine, standing in front of me like a man who had finally stopped running from what mattered. When I walked in, he looked at me the way he'd looked at me in that ballroom the first night, like life had handed him back something he didn't deserve to lose. But this time, there was no audience holding their breath. There was only the truth between us. Marcus took my hands and held them gently, the same steadiness he'd offered when he didn't know if I would accept his touch. "I won't make promises I can't keep," he said quietly, voice low enough that it felt like it belonged only to us. "But I will keep showing up, every day, in the ways that matter." I didn't need poetry. I needed presence. And the way he said it, plain, direct, told me he meant it. I said my vows without trying to sound like somebody else's idea of a woman in love. I spoke like the woman I actually am. "I spent a long time disappearing to keep other people comfortable," I told him, eyes locked on his. "I'm not doing that anymore. If you want me, you take all of me. My history, my scars, my voice." Marcus nodded once, and I saw the seriousness settle in his face like a vow. "That's what I want," he said, "all of you." When the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus didn't dip me or make a show. He simply pressed his forehead to mine for a brief moment, breathing out like a man who had been holding his breath for decades. We walked out into the daylight, with no applause, no confetti, just sun on our faces and the quiet shock of joy that doesn't have to perform. The first person I called afterward wasn't a friend or a distant cousin. It was Bryce. Not because he deserved first place, but because I refused to build my new life on revenge. Bryce answered on the second ring, voice cautious. "Ma?" he said, and the old softness in the word almost pulled me back into old patterns. I held steady. "It's Iris," I corrected gently. Not cruel, just clear. There was a pause, then his voice, quieter. "Okay," he said. "Iris." I told him I'd gotten married. I didn't explain it like I needed permission. I stated it like a fact in my life, the way grown women do when they finally stop negotiating their own happiness. Bryce didn't respond right away. I heard his breath shift. For a moment, I could feel him fighting the same thing he'd been fighting his whole life. Shame, control, the fear of being small. Then he cleared his throat. "To Marcus?" he asked, and the question held disbelief and something else underneath it. Grief. Grief for the narrative he'd been telling himself about me, about him, about who held power. "Yes," I said. Silence again. Then, unexpectedly, Bryce said, "I'm glad you're not alone." His voice sounded like it hurt to say something kind without attaching a hook to it. I didn't soften into it too fast. I didn't hand him a trophy for basic decency, but I let it land. "Thank you," I said. A week later, Bryce asked if he could come by my apartment. Not the house he used to control. My apartment. My space. He arrived without swagger. He stood at my door like he wasn't sure he deserved to knock. When I opened it, his eyes flicked over the small living room, the modest furniture, the neat kitchen, the life I had built without his approval. He swallowed, then looked at me. "I didn't know you could look lighter," he said. I didn't answer right away because part of me still wanted to punish him with silence. But punishment wasn't my goal anymore. "I can breathe here," I told him simply. Bryce nodded slowly, eyes dropping. He didn't apologize with a speech. He didn't overperform remorse. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a spare key attached to a plain key ring. "I changed the locks at the house," he said, voice rough. "It's your house, too. Your name's on it. I was wrong to act like it wasn't." He set the key on the small table by my door like it weighed 100 pounds. That was the apology that mattered, not words, but a surrender of control. Marcus never tried to replace Bryce. He didn't demand my son worship him. He stayed respectful, firm when necessary, and quiet when it wasn't his place. Bryce kept his job. He kept his pride. But he no longer had me under it. The months that followed were not perfect. Bryce slipped sometimes, tone rising, old habits reaching for control. But now I had boundaries that held. I ended calls when he crossed the line. I walked away when he tried to guilt me. And every time I did, something in Bryce shifted, slowly learning that love doesn't survive inside a cage. The truth I learned in all of this wasn't about money. It wasn't even about Marcus's billions. Power isn't money. It isn't status. It isn't revenge. Power is being able to look at your own child and refuse to disappear so they can feel bigger. Power is speaking your name out loud and meaning it. I didn't win by humiliating him. I won by finally being seen.